In our lesson for December the 28th, we're going to turn our attention to the book of Ezra. And through the remainder of this quarter, we'll be looking at Ezra and Nehemiah. So you might just mark that in your Bible. The book of Ezra is about building things, and it made me think about a church building program. I've been involved in a few of them myself. And when you decide to build a building of some kind, you don't just make the decision and then the next day start on the building and a few weeks down the way move into the building. It's a process that takes a very long time. You have to first prepare the people for the process, then you have to make the plans, and then you have to gather the resources, and then you have to have a date for a groundbreaking, and that kind of is a celebration time, and then you have to get the funds to come in, and then you have to get the people to do the work, and then it takes a long time to do the work. So any kind of building project takes a long period of time. We need to keep that in mind as we look at the book of Ezra, because in this first lesson we're going to see the laying of the building of the altar. We're going to see the laying of the foundation. We're going to see the construction of the new temple. All of that's going to take place within the framework of this lesson, the first 6 chapters in the book of Ezra. But I just want you to realize we're talking about something that took a good period of time. First aspect of this building is the building of the altar. That's Roman numeral number 1. Look at chapter 3, verses 1 through 3, and we'll begin there. Cyrus, who was the Persian leader, defeated the Babylonians and made the decision that the exiles could go back home. So the exiles now take up Cyrus's offer, and 40,000 Hebrews move back to their ancestral land. And if you want to know who they are, look back at chapter 2, beginning in verse 3, the descendants of Parash, the descendants of Shephatiah. If you want to put the Sunday school class to sleep, just kind of read through that list there in chapter 2. But that's a description of these people who come back. These are exiles returning to Israel. And Ezra tells us 2 things about these returning exiles. First thing he says is that they begin to pick up the threads of normal life. He says that the Israelites had settled into their towns and the people assembled. So you've got them returning to their land. A period of time passes now, and they're beginning to pick up the threads of their old life, normal life, back in their own land. Second thing that he tells us is that they begin to come together as a unit. It's not just that they are individuals who have come back, but there's a sense of unity among them. He says, still in that first verse, that the people assembled as one man in Jerusalem. So we've got them settling in, coming together as a people now that they are back in their homeland. But they're not just coming together to enjoy fellowship with each other, to sit around and tell stories to each other. They gather in Jerusalem to acknowledge their commitment to God. And the first thing they want to do in order to do that is to build an altar where they can make a sacrifice to God and declare their commitment to Him. We notice in verse 2 that both the religious leaders, represented by Jeshua, who is the high priest, and the political leaders, represented by Zerubbabel, all of them are involved in this sense of recommitment to God. Why did they gather in Jerusalem at this particular time? We're told in verse 4 that they came to celebrate the Feast of the Tabernacles. Feast of the Tabernacles was one of the annual feasts of the Jews, and they would try to get to Jerusalem, and they would live for a period of time in these makeshift tents or tabernacles. That's why they called it the Feast of the Tabernacles. So what did that mean? Well, living in these temporary tents would remind them of God's merciful provisions for them when they were delivered out of Egypt. And it also reminds them of, you might say, the fragility of their lives, and remind them of their ultimate dependence on God for their safety and for their well-being. So they come to Jerusalem to celebrate the Feast of the Tabernacles. The political and religious leaders come together and they make the decision that they are going to build the altar. says in verse 4, then in accordance with what is written, they celebrated the Feast of the Tabernacles, and after that they presented the regular burnt offerings. And it says back in verse 3 that they did this on the altar they had built. Despite the fear of the peoples around them, they built the altar on its foundation and offered sacrifices to the Lord. Now notice that phrase. It's an important phrase. Despite their fear of the peoples. It tells us something about the circumstances around them. Now here are these exiles. They've been gone for all these years, and all of a sudden they come back. They come back to Jerusalem, and they build the altar, and it's like, we're going to make things once more like they used to be with us in charge. So who's not going to like that? Well, the people who have been there all